Hello, my name is David Williams and I serve as the Director of Policy Outreach at Opportunity Insights, a research institute founded by Professors Raj Chetty and Nathan Hendren at Harvard and John Friedman at Brown. Today we'll be talking about the Economic Tracker, a new interactive online tool created by Opportunity Insights with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, available at tracktherecovery.org, a tool that allows policymakers, practitioners, and you to better understand how this current health crisis is impacting our economy and our communities. Today we'll be talking about the tracker's basic functionalities. I'll talk about a couple of policy use cases for the tracker, and then we'll discuss next steps and what you can expect from the tracker as it continues to develop. At Opportunity Insights, we strive to use big data and scientific inquiry to understand what drives economic opportunity and mobility, and to use that research to identify policy solutions that can support and empower low-income families. One of our previous projects with the U.S. Census Bureau used census and IRS data of millions of Americans to track the impacts on neighborhoods on the kids who grow up there. And we created an online tool called the Opportunity Atlas to help people understand what are the roots of inequality and opportunity at the neighborhood and census tract level. What we've seen during this current crisis is that publicly accessible data is extremely important, especially real-time data, understanding how the economy has changed since the beginning of the year before the crisis started, but also better understanding how our policy decisions impact things moving forward. As we enter the site, we can see that we can explore several different indicators: employment, earnings, spending, how the economy is impacting businesses. And along with these traditional economic metrics, we can also look at social metrics, specifically education, and how students are staying engaged in school as the crisis continues, as schools close, and hopefully as we begin to recover. Along with these indicators, we can also compare them to publicly available health data. So looking at COVID cases, COVID deaths, and how much time people are spending outside the home. We hope to make all of this data as accessible as possible, so you'll be able to download all of these different indicators and data series. Additionally, we have more resources available to better understand how to use the tracker. You can look at recent press to see how policymakers are using this data. We have a user guide to accompany this tool, technical documents that go deeper into how the data was used and created and put together on this platform, and also policy use cases that can help describe ways that policymakers can use this data to inform their decision-making in their communities. We've also collected additional resources that bring more information to the table about this crisis and the response. To better understand this tool's functionality and to see how our economy is faring, let's start by looking at consumer spending. Specifically, we're looking at the change in average consumer credit and debit card spending compared to the beginning of the year. And this series is based on data from our partner, Affinity Solutions. To learn more about the data used in all of these series, you can look at the bottom of the screen to see who our partners are, and you can click on the link to learn more about their company and the data they're providing. When we look at consumer spending, we see that right around March 13th, when the national emergency was declared and states began with shutdown orders, we saw a precipitous drop. So much so that by late March, consumer spending was down by over 30% across the country. By April 13th, after the CARES Act was passed and enacted and stimulus payments began to be received across the country, we start to see a slight uptick. But consumer spending overall is still down by almost 15% across the country. Now, if we look to the left on this map, we see this range of colors. And although consumer spending is down by 15% across the country, those rates differ significantly in different states. So for example, if we click on New York, that's one state that is tracked fairly consistently with the national average. However, a place like Washington, D.C. had a similar drop-off to New York, but has not recovered at all, and consumer spending is still down by over 30%, whereas a state like Tennessee, in green, saw a slightly lower drop initially and has recovered dramatically, especially right after those stimulus payments began to be received. And their consumer spending levels are actually just as high as they were before the crisis started. Now I can click off Tennessee and click off DC. We'll look specifically at New York, and we can also go deeper and look within New York at data at the county level. And something we can see by this map here is, again, significant differences across place. If I click on Show All Counties, this graph now shows those trends for every county in the state. And when you look at the map, you see certain places those consumer spending trends are back up, and others, they're still lagging and down by almost 30%. And if you note here on the bottom, we can click on Show Key Dates, and these dates now specifically track to policy dates related to New York specifically. Last but not least, we can also compare these trends across metropolitan areas. So we can compare New York to my hometown of Detroit, to a community like Seattle, and dozens of other metropolitan areas across the country. Now, beyond geography, we can also look at what industries specifically are being impacted. So now when I click on Show All Subcategories, the map shows the breakdowns for different industry groups. We can see that spending for groceries actually spiked before these lockdown orders went in place, people preparing for the closure. But other industries have not fared as well. Things like transportation, apparel and general merchandise, and healthcare are all down. And probably not surprisingly, activities that require going outside of your home, like entertainment and recreation and restaurant and hotels, are significantly down and have seen almost no recovery. What does this mean in terms of policy? Beyond just being able to track these general trends, this can also serve as a tool for state and local officials who are thinking around budgeting. With real-time data, we're better able to forecast things like sales tax revenue, which can impact budgets significantly. So this is a tool where we hope to partner with local authorities and local governments to help them be able to plan more effectively for the future. Next, we can look at another policy use case by exploring how small businesses have been impacted. And specifically, what is the change in the number of small businesses that are open? And this is defined as companies having financial transaction activity, and we're comparing it to early January. So specifically, let's look at South Carolina, one of the states that has opened up most early. So something we can see is that small businesses actually began to close in mid-March, which was several weeks before South Carolina's stay-at-home order was enacted. So as select businesses begin to reopen, will these businesses begin to come back online? And something we see is that after April 22nd, after certain businesses were reopened, and after May 4th, after the stay-at-home order was ended, we do see a slight uptake in businesses opening back up. But business openings are still down by over 20%. Additionally, we can compare this to COVID cases. And something we see is that small businesses began to shut down at the same time as that uptick in COVID cases in South Carolina. And although we do see this slight trend upwards, we see that COVID cases are still happening at the same rate as they were in their peak in early April. And we can also look at other states. So for example, Alaska was one of the first states to open back up. And we see in Alaska, after the stay-at-home order ended on April 24th, there was a slight uptick in businesses reopening, but that has seemed to plateau in recent weeks. So again, it'll be very important to see if businesses have the confidence to open back up after these stay-at-home orders end. And this real-time data allows policymakers to potentially readjust because they have that real-time feedback on what's happening in their economies. Next, we can use our education indicator to get another perspective on how the economy and this crisis is impacting our communities. So here, we're looking at how an online math curriculum from Zearn is being engaged with by students. It helps us track which communities potentially are better able to keep their students engaged when schools shut down and students have to learn from home. And what we see is that there's a significant amount of variation across the country. You see these areas of deep red in the South, where engagement with this online platform has dropped significantly. And in the Northeast, you see more greens, where engagement has stayed up. In New York, for example, we see this slight drop off in mid-February, which relates to spring break. And then right around the same time that New York public schools closed, we see a very significant drop off. But those rates have rebounded, and student engagement actually went back to those pre-crisis levels. However, if we compare that to a state like Virginia, we saw a much more dramatic drop off when schools closed, and there's been almost no recovery. So much so that there's almost a 90% decrease in engagement with this online platform. And places like Connecticut have actually seen an uptick in engagement. There was a very slight drop off initially, but those levels have risen above pre-crisis levels. And what might be behind this? So one thing we can do, if I declick Connecticut and Virginia, is look at the differences between high and low income communities within the same state. So within New York, if I click on show all subcategories, high income communities have seen an uptick in this engagement with this platform, whereas low income communities have seen a very significant drop off. Right? It could be the case that in lower income communities where there are more essential workers who can't stay at home, students have a more difficult time transitioning to out of school learning because the parent isn't there to assist them. In some communities, especially rural areas, it might be due to overall broadband access. In my community in Detroit, where I served in the mayor's office, there's been an initiative to make sure that every student in the Detroit public school system has access to free internet and a laptop to ensure that the digital divide is not worsening this crisis in the most vulnerable communities. This tool allows us to pinpoint which places might be struggling most to keep their students and their families engaged. When I click on counties within New York, we can see significant variation across the state. Certain districts and counties have seen a very high drop-off, and other places have seen increased engagement. Again, there might be several reasons why we see these different trends, but this can serve as a powerful tool for policymakers to think about how they can target their resources. As we turn towards rebuilding and recovery, we hope that the Economic Tracker can serve as an effective and useful resource for policymakers, practitioners, and you. We will be updating the data regularly to ensure that we can track these trends in real time. All the data will also be available for download. As we move forward, we'll be bringing on new data partners to be able to track new social and economic indicators. We'll also be able to dive to deeper levels of geographic granularity and track impacts on specific subgroups, especially the most vulnerable in our country. As we move forward, we need your feedback to ensure that this tool is helpful as possible. If you have any thoughts, comments, or ideas, if you're a potential policymaker who wants to use this tool or data partner, please reach out to us at policy@opportunityinsights.org. As we move forward, having reliable real-time data will be extremely important to crafting effective, impactful policies that can help us rebuild out of this crisis and help create an economy that works for all of us.